Command and Conquer. It's one of the most iconic franchises in all of PC gaming. The original C&C is largely responsible for the birth of real-time strategy games, while its sequel, Red Alert, is an alternative universe classic of its very own. So perhaps it's no surprise that these games became the latest candidates for a remaster. But for fans of Westwood, C&C, and PC gaming, there are a lot of surprising things about this story. The unlikely reunion of some legendary developers with their old code, a wild search for missing tapes full of joy and heartbreak, and a major publisher who tends to attract a lot of community heat, including a council of fans, in the process of making this game. The moment this project was announced, I wanted Noclip to get a deeper look at what went on, and with all of us stuck at home talking over video chat, it made sense to cast the net as wide as possible. So not only did we talk to a handful of the original developers at Petroglyph, but also the animation house in Malaysia that worked on updating the graphics, and the man who's been shepherding this project from the beginning. But before we get into all that, let's travel back in time a little bit. It's 1995, Clinton's in the White House, Coolio's on top of the charts, and Command & Conquer is taking the world by storm.
So I originally got hired at Westwood to run their online services, which was basically CompuServe, Prodigy, America Online, all of those things that don't really even exist anymore. I set up a bulletin board system so we could let people download patches, and I was customer service. I did a whole bunch of other jobs. The fun thing about working at Westwood back in the Command & Conquer days was the amount of input that everybody had on the project. We'd work on it all day, and then we would play from like 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening to like 9, 10 o'clock. You couldn't beat people off with a stick. It was like, okay, one more game. Especially when the multiplayer stuff came online. We were just all hanging out. I mean, we kind of hung out at work anyway. You're just hanging out with your friends, enjoying, being together and working on stuff together.
Yeah, and for me, I was the senior composer at Westwood Studios. I was part of an audio team. Audio director at the time, Paul Mudra, and lead sound designer, Dwight Okahara, and the three of us have been working together since I'd started there back in 91, somewhere in there. we had our respective roles and just worked really super well together. When we started working on Command & Conquer, technology was shifting pretty rapidly at the time, and it got to the point where we were going to be putting, games on CD, which was the big deal at the time, because CDs were typically just used for audio and music. But then, data came into play, and then the idea of putting the games on discs, was a new idea. So then with that was the idea with a streaming audio came with that. And so that was also one of the first games that we did that utilized that technology. But, same thing went for sound effects and voiceovers and videos and the whole thing. So it felt like the Wild West, video game development, because, we were utilizing all of this new tech and everybody was excited about it. And we were excited just to be creative with it and figure out how we can tell the story of this game, with all these new toys.
So gosh, yeah, I was 12 when I discovered it. It came out in the late summer of 1995. Leading up to that, there had been Doom 2, which many credit as kind of the first kind of RTS game as, we would know the genre today. Blizzard had followed up with Warcraft 1. Wasn't as popular as, what Warcraft 2 and obviously the rest of their games became. So they had kind of dabbled in it. But when C&C came out in 1995, I think a lot of people credit it with kind of popularizing the genre, kind of defining a lot of the moving parts and the mechanics that the genre eventually became. So I think what was really special about Command & Conquer is that from the second you install the game, it just pulls you into this world, this atmospheric world with this crazy animated installation sequence, these full motion video cinematics where there's these commanders, talking to you and recruiting you to their side, these kind of branching missions and objectives. And so I just loved it back then. And then, it really kind of, Warcraft 2 came out a few months after that. They did a lot of great things for the genre. And then you had Red Alert, a year after that. And that started to push, missions and all different things and different examples. And then that really just, then you have the genre really taking off with, Age of Empires, Total Annihilation, and StarCraft and everything that happened thereafter. So it was really kind of that first game that kind of defined what that RTS genre would be for at least the next 5 to 6 years.
Command & Conquer's unique blend of gameplay and theatrics propelled it into notoriety pretty much immediately. And as the games pumped out sequels, they got larger, the videos more ridiculous, and the stars bigger. In the era of multimedia, Command & Conquer was king. Soon after, in 1998, Westwood Studios was acquired by Electronic Arts. And as is so often the case with large corporations, it eventually found itself caught up in a restructuring plan.
Back in 2003, there was a plan at EA to consolidate all the different studios, all the development into a central location. And for a while, they were thinking that that might be Las Vegas. The short story is that they decided, no, you know what, it makes sense. We're going to send everybody down to EA LA. We're going to get a whole bunch of people. We're going to get all those Westwood people. We're going to bring them down, and they're going to work on Command & Conquer 3 at EA LA. And it's going to be one big happy family, you know. And I'm sure that they assumed that that was going to work out great. But we had a large group of people say, you know what, I'd really prefer to stay here in Las Vegas at the end of the day. Some handful of people went up to EA LA and they started working on Command & Conquer 3. And then I think they got sucked into Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings RTS game instead. And so they never really got back to Command & Conquer for a while.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
And at the same time, we had a handful of people here, Joe Bostic, Mike Legg, and Steve Tall, who were all three programmers, all worked on the Command & Conquer games. They decided, you know what, let's start our own studio here. I bet we could get a gig with somebody making a game, an RTS game, because RTS games at the time were really hot. And then we just started working on Star Wars, and one game after the other. It's been a really fun ride the whole time. You know, I was wondering, wow, I wonder what would have happened if I had gone to EA, LA, or Redwood Shores. But I really enjoy what we've done over the last 17 years at Petroglyph.
Petroglyph Games has 17 years of development behind them, creating games like Star Wars Empire at War, Guardians of Graxia, and Grey Goo. During those years, EA were developing Command & Conquer games out of their studio in Los Angeles. It was here that the young developer, Jim Vessella, would rise through the ranks, working on games like Command & Conquer 3 and Red Alert 3, and eventually becoming lead producer on the expansion Kane's Wrath. Jim would leave EA but come back some years later to work out of their studio in the Bay Area. At one time or another, Petroglyph had approached EA about doing work on a possible remake, but nothing ever came of it. The stars hadn't aligned quite yet. To find the source of this unlikely collaboration, we have to go back to EA's 2018 E3 press conference.
Security clearance verified. Welcome, Commander. The Global Defense Initiative has received intel of nuclear missile silos across the globe, and we need your help securing them.
Command & Conquer Rivals, the mobile version, was announced at EA Play that year. It had a bit of a strong reaction from the community, let's say. I was talking to some of the studio leadership, and they were trying to figure out, is there something we could do? We're hearing this feedback from the community. You know, Jim, you've worked on Command & Conquer for a long time. What do you think this means? And I said, well, you know, I think the community really wants the franchise to come back to PC. You know, that's something that, you know, you hear in the community. And they were like, well, you know, what are some ways we could potentially do that? And they were throwing out ideas like the remaster. And they're like, well, how do you approach that, Jim? I'm like, well, I would have Petroglyph do it. I would go back to the original creators and see if they wanted to do it. They're like, all right, why don't you give them a call? And I was like, what do you mean? I'm like, doesn't that have to go through like business development or legal or some? We're EA, it's a big company. We don't just go randomly call some studio. And they're like, no, just go do it. I'm like, okay. And so I wrote up this kind of heartfelt email because I never actually met the team at Petroglyph before, working on the franchise all these years. You know, I knew all their names and I'd heard all the stories, but I never actually worked with them myself. I wrote their team a lengthy email that described my background and my love for the franchise and, you know, a lot of the similar people we'd known. And I said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? And they wrote back and said, you know, this is music to our ears. Let's talk.
Yes, sir. Not a problem. Vehicle reporting. Yes, sir.
There's a lot to talk about when it comes to remastering a game like C&C, but we're going to focus on 5 areas of development that I think are the most interesting. Remastering the FMV video, how the team made decisions over altering gameplay, Frank's work on remastering all of the audio and music, how a team of 50 artists in Malaysia remastered the graphics, and how the developers included a community of die-hard fans during this entire process. But first up, well, you know I'm a fan of video, so let's chat about the missing tapes, shall we?
So, you're the new addition to the Brotherhood.
So, we've been engaging with the community super closely since the day we kind of greenlit the project. And one of them tipped me off to this old Westwood Betacam video archive stash that had been around in EALA for many years, but it kind of gotten lost. And then there was a rumor that it all got thrown out when Victory Games was shut down. And I reached out to the community manager, who said, yeah, we sent it all to the dumpster, and I almost cried. But I reached out to a colleague of mine who works down at EALA still, and was working there during that time. And she says that she actually rescued all the tapes and put them into a storage closet down in the EALA like 5 years ago. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And this was in December of 2018. So I booked a ticket. I flew down there like the first thing after a holiday break, like January 3rd or something. Met up with the facilities team. They unlocked this old storage closet for me. And I went digging through there and I found it. I found this giant shelf of old Betacam videotapes from the Westwood days. And, spent an entire afternoon sorting through all these tapes. And there were hundreds of just Betacam tapes and some stuff that was related to the original C&Cs. And I was so excited because they looked like the official, things. And it turns out that they were just the old crappy compressed stuff that had been copied onto a videotape for backup. And I was just like, oh no. And I was so sad. And it kind of cemented the fact that they just don't exist anywhere.
Set 3, take 1.
But we did find, we found all this extra B-roll footage from the shoots. So we got over like 4 hours of old B-roll footage of them filming against the green screen and then doing other takes that had never been seen before. And that stuff was actually restored pretty well. That's actually almost better quality than some of the other stuff we have. And we've put all of that into the Remastered Collection. So we kind of edited it all, chopped it all up, kind of per mission and everything. And whenever you beat a mission in the remaster now, you're going to unlock a piece of this content. You can kind of watch through the filming of the scenes. But for the actual FMVs, we were kind of back to the beginning at that point. And again, it was kind of the community who said, hey, we've dabbled in kind of up-resing some of this stuff with like AI algorithms and things like that. Can we help out in any way? And so Joe, who I mentioned, Joe kind of loved this stuff as well. So he actually partnered with the community. They were riffing on algorithms and trying to, fine-tune the best way to get the lighting better. And Joe kind of put together a final algorithm that he used to essentially up-res all of the FMVs, there's hours of it. So, we were able to increase the base resolution, we're able to increase the frame rate. And then because we have Frank on our team, he was able to go back and do kind of an audio touch up on everything.
We spent about 2 months reviewing all the video and trying different methods of up-resing it so that, it was more acceptable on a high-res monitor. And during that process, I had a good number of people approaching us trying to audition for roles in the videos because they thought we were going to reshoot everything.
It is kind of remastered in a sense to kind of the best that we think you could do with the source footage that we had. We're able to use actually the console versions as a base because it provided like an MPEG foundation, which was a little bit better. It's been a fascinating journey, and it's one of those things where we just never know where the road was going to take us.
As a reward for your service to the people, I wish to promote you.
Despite all the work that the team put in and the obvious improvements over the original versions, there are already Steam reviews criticizing the quality of the FMV. Back when I talked to Jim before the game's launch, he talked about something similar during internal playtests at EA. Some players came away unimpressed, while others, who remember the older versions a little bit better, were shocked by the improvement.
I can't tell you how PO'd that'll make a lot of people around here.
Remasters sound like tricky business. Most players want the game to feel like how they remembered it, but without all the inconveniences that so many older games carry. For CNC, this meant a lot of work on interface, quality of life elements like a multiplayer browser. But what happens when you encounter bugs that shipped with the game, exploits that players use to complete tough levels? I asked the team how they decided when to change something and when to let it be.
I'm on it.
Well, there were certainly a lot of challenges. I mean, the first thing that we had to do was kind of wrestle with what a remaster is versus a remake. The remaster, of course, taking the original game and updating it with new graphics and maybe a few new features here and there. A remake is, hey, let's scrap it all, let's start over, let's re-envision it as it would be made today. The remaster was the thing that was on the books that everybody had in mind. It's been kind of proven out that remasters are working and that people are really enjoying going back and playing, the Age of Empires games and the World of Warcraft type stuff. When we started talking about the project, about what was it going to be and, what could we do with it, there was a lot of discussion about whether we should make it 3D and we should use the Petroglyph RTS engine, which we've been working on for like the last 17 years. Or should we try and update the existing engine with all of its antiquities and flaws, because of course you go back and look at that code and it's a little stale these days, And then of course there was the UI too. When you go back and you play the original game, it's pretty good. It still holds up, but it's not as convenient as the newer RTS games are out there. And so it's a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a slog to use that UI. And we knew that we needed to do something a little bit different and update that. We could have made a few balance changes. We certainly had a lot of opinions come in like, oh, hey, you should make this better. You should make that better. But when you're doing a remaster, you can't make too many changes because it's like Jello, right? If you poke it in one spot, it's going to pop out on the other spot. And let's say we made Mammoth tanks just a little more deadly, right? That could impact how the AI performs in a certain mission later on. It might make that mission unplayable, or it might make it so that the AI can't perform a certain task to advance the mission. We were running into all those kinds of things. And so we basically stuck to the script as much as we could, where we could. We did make some improvements along the way, though. We integrated the Red Alert AI into the Command Conquer engine because there were so many similarities between the two that was possible. We made a few very minor changes to balance in a couple spots where it made sense to fix bugs that the community had identified for us. Joe was really good about shepherding us through that process. And of course, we were conferring with the community council, the Command Conquer Community Council, all the way too, and they helped us for quite a bit of that.
Moving out.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, there's like a flashback moment like every other day or so around the studio, right? It's like, oh, I remember that. And oh, yeah, that was super annoying, I mean, we think about how silly the harvesters were and, how the videos put together a story. And I have to admit, it all did come rushing back because when we went back, we were like, oh, yeah, we forgot about that. And oh, yeah, that was a problem. We should do something about that. And I think Joe was kind of summarizing it best. He said, if it's a bug that we should have fixed, but didn't, we need to look at that very closely and figure out why we didn't fix that bug. And if we were releasing this game today and we noticed that was an issue, would we fix it today? And then we try and, reconcile those two and determine a course of action on whether we should or shouldn't make a change to the game. We're going through the code and we're noticing comments, from the old programmers who work at the new company, work for Petroglyph. They're like, oh my gosh, I typed this 23 years ago, I put a comment, don't touch this code under penalty of death, come talk to me first. And so there's all these little snippets of history within the code itself.
Building.
By today's audio standards, like we would have been throwing audio 1-to-1 against every single thing in the game. But, there was things that were not playing audio in the game, like for example, like vehicle engines, right? Like you don't hear vehicle engine sounds. You have the acknowledgement of the guy's voice, whatever the unit's voice is when you move or tell them what to do, but you don't hear them, the engines constantly going, which is something that would be more common in today's games.
Yes, sir. Acknowledged.
Reinforcements have arrived.
So I was just like, God, should I take some liberties here and put that in? I'm like, no, I shouldn't, because there's a certain, I think that the way that the audio worked in those games was that things were allowed to stand out, right? You had the voices which stood out to people. You had the music which stood out to people. Obviously, the weapon sounds stood out to people, and the signature structures and things like that, and of course the HUD voices, the EVA voices, and all of those things. Those should still be allowed to stand out the way they did those many years ago. I didn't, so I wrestled with that for a while, and I came to the conclusion, like, you know what, this is the way it was. Let it be. Let's make what's there better, but let's not add things that are unnecessary, because there's a part of that charm that might go away if we do that. That was one thing. And then, of course, one of the things we did was we brought back the original voice of Eva, which was Kaya Hunsinger.
New construction options. Building.
She happens to live not that far away from EA Redwood Shores, so that was a great coincidence there. And she still sounds exactly the same.
Unit ready. Building.
She came in, she was willing to do it, and for the remastered version, we have her exact voice reading those exact same lines again, but just in much higher quality now versus the padded closet, which we had her record in back in 1995.
Yeah.
One of the reasons C&C became an instant classic is that it was a great game in almost every sense. It was laying the foundations for real-time strategy gameplay. It looked fantastic, had cutscenes with full motion video in them, and with a bit of work, you could even play it online. But another massive feather in Command Conquer's cap was its terrific soundtrack. Legendary composer Frank Klepacki has been with Westwood and Petroglyph this entire time. He joined Westwood early, composing the music for Eye of the Beholder 2 and Dune 2 before moving on to C&C. He's been loyal to the Las Vegas group ever since, working on Petroglyph's games for almost 2 decades. When the remaster came along, Frank said he was delighted to have an excuse to work on all the music again, having already planned a collaboration with the video game band the Tiberian Sons. But on the original C&C, Frank was the composer, not the sound designer. So outside of remastering the music, cleaning up and re-recording the FMV audio, he also had to worry about sound effects.
So I had to do a bit of research. I had to, get in my former audio colleagues' brains there and just kind of do a deep dive into it and pay homage to that, into their work and honor that work. Okay, what did we have available back then? What were we actually using? What tools and what, libraries and all of these things. And so I researched that stuff. And fortunately, I've kept a lot of my own personal copies over the years of, I used to mirror my home studio with my work studio. So I bought the same libraries. So I had my own license, and I bought the same audio hardware. So I'd have that mirrored in case I would come up with an idea that I thought was cool and then bring it into work, or vice versa. And I was also able to locate the original mixes of the majority of the music. There were some things I had to recreate from scratch though. I think 5 songs actually that I absolutely could not find for the life of me. So with that in mind, I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna dust off this old, synthesizers that I got, and and I can't tell you how many hours and even days that I spent in the office just auditioning sounds and instruments, because there's just too many of them to go through. So it's just like, is this the end? Nope, next. Is this it? Nope, next. Is this it? Nope, next. Until I finally would find that one instrument. Yes, this is the one. This is exactly it. Cool. Now let's go to the next track and repeat the process. So it was very tedious and very detail oriented, but I thought it was worth doing for the sake of retaining the authenticity of everything. Same thing with the sound effects. I went through every single sound in the sound libraries that I had and made sure I found the exact sound or the exact closest thing to it, and most of the time I would nail it. There were a few things that I updated with the high fidelity, now exposing what quality was there. I wanted things to be consistent, and when you're remastering something in an audio context especially, the whole thing is about consistency, balancing EQs and levels, and all that sort of thing. So I did that with all of the sounds, did it all with the music, so that the entire collection of music, for that matter, was remastered to that standard as well. It wasn't just from game to game. We're doing a collection of games here.
Herr Hitler.
Ja, was ist los? Ich habe keine Zeit, hier rumzustehen.
Ja, ich verstehe.
And when it came down to actually the German version of the game, we ran into some obstacles there because back then they censored it. They had actually left things out or cut videos or edited them like completely different than what we had originally. And we were running into these as we were going along and checking every video. And I was just like, you realize that we're missing a whole part of Stalin's speech here, or we're missing the whole part of Einstein finding Hitler and all of these things, you know, and even like the sounds of soldiers dying was removed and replaced with robots in the original. So we had to do that to, you know, keep it across the board, because we're in a different age, and that's allowed now to be, you know, the original version. So we tried to restore that as much as possible while retaining the German dialogue and all of that. So it was a challenge to cut and edit and redo some of those things to make it work, but we managed to pull that off. And yeah, that was a very, very interesting audio journey there with regard to the remasters.
While Frank worried about audio, on the other side of the world, a team in Malaysia was doing the work on remastering CNC's beloved sprites. Lemon Sky, an animation studio working in both games and television, had somewhere between 50 artists working on this project. The time difference between Malaysia and Nevada meant that the two studios basically didn't share any working hours. Perhaps this ended up being a blessing, as Lemon Sky said they spent very little time in meetings, instead posting updates directly to the game's build and checking in on feedback and revisions the following morning via Slack and Jira. And some of the team are even old enough to remember playing the original.
So we're Lemon Sky. So we're located in Malaysia. We're a leading art and animation studio in Southeast Asia. We're mostly doing CG animation production work. We provide services for a game developer.
We will start up with the concept art, do the concept art based on the legacy art, you know, because the resolution is very, very small. We will add on details for concept art, you know, but we will still base on the legacy art for the color. If we see that there's 3 colors, then we have to maintain the 3 colors, but we also add on the details on top of that. So after that, then we will go through the process for 3D.
So in 3D, we will match all the angles. So in Sprite, in Legacy, we know that there's some distortion on every angle. So what we do is we need to reanimate it.
So you did them in 3D, but
yeah,
like you said, the camera angle is like this weird oblique thing which distorts the distance on those original sprites. So if you looked at that from a different angle, would it look really strange?
Yes.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so sometimes he will need to manually adjust the model with different angles to get the right angle. Looks really alike to the legacy art.
So at first we thought that we're gonna rebuild everything by 3D and then reintegrate everything into new engines. But I mean, throughout the productions, we have decided to just reuse the same method. So render the things by using sprite as well. So for the animations, of course, when we're checking up for the legacy stock image, a series of the JPEGs of those animations, end up we're starting with just recapturing by looking at the pixel. So all time we're squeezing our eye and look at the monitor. Oh, this most likely is this pose. So we just try to match it and then and animate all the key poses.
Chew on this. Let's rock.
It could have been a lot of pain and suffering, really, but they have done an extraordinarily good job of working with us within the constraints of the old code. We originally hired them to potentially do the game in 3D. We kind of switched gears with them like 2 months into the project. Hey, you know what? We're going to do 2D instead, because by going 2D, we can retain more of the original feel. We can also switch back and forth between the old and the new graphics. And it will just feel much more Command and Conquer. The attention to detail was really, really high. on this project. I mean, pixel perfect in a lot of cases, where it truly looks like the unit or the structure or the terrain has been up-res. We didn't just make, again, a copy. It is that thing in 4K now.
One interesting problem the team ran into was trying to come to terms with what a CNC fan wanted in 2020. Many of the original Westwood team hadn't played Command & Conquer in years. Meanwhile, fan communities had been keeping the game alive this entire time, organising tournaments, setting up ways to play it online. In an effort to get their feedback on the project early and likely to win over the trust of the Command & Conquer community at large, EA decided to operate as transparently as possible, posting frequent updates on Reddit and creating a small community council who would give feedback for the duration of the project.
Feedback on the subreddit has been super valuable because sometimes we put stuff out there and they're like, this isn't working, and we'll react to that. Other times it's a great tool of kind of validation. It's something that we're really nervous about, like when we first put out some of our just art. But when you get that kind of validation, you get like a 98% upvote rating on a post, you just get a little sense of like, okay, I think we're heading in the right direction on this, and it gives you that confidence to keep pushing forward. So it's been a fun interaction with kind of the greater community, but we felt we needed that really deep knowledge to help us on a lot of the details throughout the way. So I kind of recruited, like, it's 14 of the top CNC community members in the world. So these are the guys who've written the top mods and that have kept the franchise alive for the past 10 to 15 years. The people who ran the top fan sites, the people who run the subreddit, some of the top competitive players and shoutcasters. And I kind of asked permission from EA, like, can I develop the game alongside these people and just give them complete transparency to everything we're doing each day? And they said yes. And so we have a Discord with them where literally every day, probably for the past year and a half, we're talking to them. We share with them the build at every single stage. We've shown them super early concept art, super early audio stuff. They give us feedback on it. They don't guide us. It's been this crazy back and forth collaboration. They have such deep insight also into like the source code, and because they've been modding these games for 15 years, that they can help advise us on like how to fix certain bugs. They wrote up, several hundred bugs in this giant spreadsheet about here's all the bugs in the legacy game. And, we then regressed those against the remaster, some of which were already fixed because they might have been some old rendering error or something, but there was a lot that were still happening. And, we'll show them art and they'll be giving us, finite feedback on the shape of the turret and the rendering angle of the Orca. And it's been the most incredible, engagement that I've been able to experience in my 15-year career of working with them. There was a community member who designed our box. So the box that millions of people are seeing right now, the guy with the cross goggles, that was just made by a community member, and we commissioned it from him to use as our formal marketing art for the entire game. We had to hear some really tough community feedback over the past 10 years on the franchise to finally get to that point of understanding that we needed some help. And I don't think we would have been able to make the game without that, and definitely not to the authenticity and to the quality that I think we're going to be able to deliver.
We've covered a handful of the biggest features the team had to work on for this remaster, but there was a lot of other work going on elsewhere too. Now, we don't often let interviews just rattle off a bunch of features in an effort to sell the game, but honestly, I can't really think of a better way to demonstrate the breadth of work that was required to ensure a game from 1995 felt like a substantial project in 2020. So, I guess we'll make an exception for you, EA. Jim, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So the Command Conquer Remastered Collection, it includes the complete original Command Conquer, also known as Tiberian Dawn. It also includes the complete Red Alert and all 3 expansion packs. So the Covert Operations, Counter-Strike, and the Aftermath. So that combines into over, I think, 100 campaign missions, a couple hundred multiplayer maps. We have been able to bring console missions that were onto the PC for the first time. So those are also playable, which is great. We've added in the bonus gallery, so that's got, as I mentioned, like 4 hours of kind of B-roll behind the scenes footage that you'll unlock as you go through. Frank Klepacki has remastered the entire soundtrack, which is over 7 hours long. Includes over 20 tracks newly recorded by the Tiberian Sons, and he's also found some unreleased music that never came out that we've been able to include in the remaster. We've completely rebuilt multiplayer from scratch, so now it runs on dedicated servers. We've added in, quick match 1v1. We've added in a leaderboard, custom games, replays, observer mode. So all these things that were not even thought about back in 1995. And then everything has been remastered in 4K ready. So all the in-game, animations, VFX, units, terrain has all been remastered. All those menus. And then you can real-time switch with the graphics between the legacy and the remastered graphics, and Skirmish and Campaign. So it'll be available on both Origin and Steam. So we're bringing the game to Steam for the first time, which is very exciting. It's actually kind of got native Steam support, so that means we get achievements on both platforms. We have a map editor that we've built, so you can actually utilize and build your own maps and utilize some of the distribution tools. And so, we're really excited about bringing it to kind of where people are and get their communities and their friends list going and have them play there.
It's been a few weeks since the launch of Command Conquer Remaster, and it's reviewed incredibly well by both the press and users on Steam, so EA are sure to be pleased by the reaction from fans. But perhaps what's most exciting about all of this is the doors it now opens. We talked to the folks at Petroglyph about Command & Conquer and how they'd love to make another one. And with the CNC community re-energized and a momentum behind the series that so often felt like it was stuck in time, perhaps we'll see more from this collaboration in the future. With a company the size of EA, you have to imagine that this game will have to sell a certain amount to justify it, but at least as an outsider looking in, the Command & Conquer revival that we've all been hoping and praying for has never seemed more likely.
In general, the entire EA organization has been excited and very, very supportive. I mean, the support we're getting right now is better than the support we got when we were Westwood Studios sometimes. It's just they are so behind us right now and want to make this such a success. And so I'm really happy to be working with them, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
I can't believe we're actually about to launch this thing. And, as I'm sure you hear from a lot of developers, making games is hard. And there are so many things that could go sideways on a project. And so we hope we deliver what they're looking for. We're eager to get more of that feedback as we launch. And hopeful about where the franchise can go.
The Grain Trade Center in Vienna was the 17th urban bombing in 4 weeks, blamed on Nod terrorists.
The Security Commission remains in closed session tonight following Nod terrorist actions in Slovenia.
At least your mother tipped well.
Harsh, unforgiving wilderness.
New Tiberium harvesting methods instituted by the Brotherhood of Nod increase profitability by 49%.
Nod Tiberium holdings now account for almost half of the world's known supply, giving the quasi-terrorist group incredible leverage in the London Gold Exchange. On the domestic side,
Cover of Tiberium ignored reporters at Hong Kong's Second World Tiberium Economic Impact Summit. Mobius is expected to refute charges from the scientific community that Tiberium might be dangerous.
Only ma alone al-asfar.
As the GDI forces take off in another Nod assault, the free world holds its breath. This is Greg Burdett, WWN, somewhere in the Mediterranean.